You are listening live to the Sound of Freedom on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for hour number 2. I'm your host, Ryan Brooks. We had Mr. Jim Fetzer on the line with us here, but apparently he got busy. I don't know. He's doing an interview right now with some international group or something, so I'm leaving it open right now. He is welcome to call back in. But wow, I did not plan to have the discussion that we did during the first hour, folks, and I thank you for toughing it out. I just simply cannot understand how somebody can settle for the lesser. Well, I'll take that back. We are conditioned and told over and over and over and over again to settle for the lesser of two evils, and look where that has gotten us. Look where that has gotten us. And now I have a grown man who is my senior by, 40 years, come on the airwaves and tell me that I better vote for Obama because he's the lesser of two evils. Are you kidding me? I mean, you guys heard the reactions. I'm not trying to attack him too much. Hopefully he'll come back on the air here. We'll see. I know he's a very busy man, but... And if you noticed, I couldn't get in there when he kept doing his 10 points or whatnot. He would keep bringing up all of these political football issues. Political football issues, the middle class, women's rights, abortion. All of these things are political football issues. Did you guys hear what he said when we started talking about economic collapse? He'd get loud, he'd rant, and try to go to another topic. Everyone who's out there fighting in the political structure right now, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or you're an independent or whatever you're doing, you're fighting in the system to try to make it better. What are you going to do when things fall upon themselves? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to stay in the political arena when you have no food to feed yourself? How are you going to stay in the political arena when you don't have any weapons to defend yourself? Those are all some pretty interesting questions. Looks like we have Mr. Fetzer back on the line with us here. Jim, you there?
Yeah, I do, Ryan. Yeah, I had to take a international news interview during the break. Thank you so much for keeping me on.
No worries. You're making for some interesting radio here. I was just kind of explaining to the listeners where I was coming from as far as voting for the lesser of two evils has gotten us to such a low point in this country that continuing to vote for the lesser of two evils is not going to do anything but bring us more problem, more troubles. And I want to ask you a question that I got from a listener in the chat about the NDAA. He mentioned, I'm assuming the listener is talking about you. He said that you mentioned NDAA, which is supposed to be for military budget, but wound up being the Patriot Act on steroids, and Romney supports it. So if he gets in, it will be enforced, as if Obama gets back in, it'll be enforced. And either way, each one of them will probably come out with even harsher legislation. How can he lean more support to the man that overturned a judge's order to rule the National Defense Authorization Act an unconstitutional act and say her ruling was unconstitutional?
Well, let me just say I published on the NDAA. There's an article of mine co-authored with Dennis Camino entitled From America to America, the Endgame, where I, attack the NDAA as an atrocity. Just I have now published several new articles on Veterans Today about Homeland Security acquiring this vast stock of ammunition, and the fact that a Senate subcommittee report has revealed that there is no domestic terrorist threat. I mean, this is absolutely shocking. Go on to Veterans Today, Jim Fetzer, and just start working backwards from my most recent articles so you can see my more elaborate discussion of this. I am giving the reasons why, even though we have two seriously flawed candidates, one of them is preferable to the other. Now, I didn't make up this game, and I agree that there are those of you like yourself, Ryan, who are willing to walk away. But my inclination is to say and fight it out as best we can, every single inch for democracy, for freedom, as much as we can retain, because if we deal ourselves out of the game, then we have no right, no moral entitlement to complain about the result.
All right, I hear what you're saying. Now, to that I say, Mr. Fetzer, look at our elections right now. The only way that you can even appeal to the American people is to do things like go on Nickelodeon, David Letterman, and Comedy Central. This country, the social fabric of this country is collapsing. Look at what they've done to Ron Paul, the only candidate who's even telling people any bit of truth. He gets destroyed in the mainstream media, and the average person thinks he's absolutely insane. Why would we want keep fighting for these people who don't even know anything about reality? I mean, they want to see their president on Nickelodeon. That's how they're going to make up their mind on who they're going to vote for.
Ryan, there has been a long-term degradation in the functional intelligence of the American people. We're far more gullible now than we have been in the past. This is why I spent my whole career as an educator teaching students how to see through all the nonsense, all the bullshit, and to sort out what's really going on, okay? That's what I have done my whole life. I agree that because of some combination of influences, including our preoccupation with television, which involves a lower degree of mental engagement than when we're in deep sleep, that the American people have by and large lost their critical capacity to sort these things out. That's a reason why shows like yours and mine are so very important, and why the internet as a research tool is absolutely vital to those of us who want to figure out what's really going on. Now, the fact of the matter is that politically, more Americans get their news from Jon Stewart than they do from the New York Times. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And the New York Times, I'm sorry to say, like every other news outlet in this country, is dominated by the CIA. I mean, if I already have mentioned what William Casey, who was Ronald Reagan's director of the CIA, observed, he said that the CIA will have been a success when everything Americans believe is false. You have to combine that with what William Colby would subsequently observe, namely that the CIA owns everyone of significance in the mainstream media. I mean, this is a monster problem. We are in the snares of an enormous cancer. That cancer is the Central Intelligence Agency. If you want to get serious, not only should we abolish the Fed, with which I agree with you and with Ron Paul up and down the line, but we should dismantle the CIA, which John Kennedy wanted to do. He said he was going to shatter it into 1,000 pieces, in part, and that's part of the reason why he received the treatment he did in Dallas in 1963.
Right, and I understand what you're saying. I do agree with you there. We definitely need to abolish the Federal Reserve. I would not be against abolishing the CIA. I think they're just, I mean, from what I saw in Afghanistan, what they did, I mean, whenever we did a drug bust of any type, the CIA showed up out of nowhere and took all the drugs away. And that's just scraping the surface of what they've done. But what I'm getting at is, let me get this point out here, Jim. I'm with you with all that, but then you turn around and endorse people who are like 1,000% against you. They'll never abolish the Fed. They are owned by the CIA and other groups like that. I mean, how can we continue to vote for these people when they do not care about us at all?
I've said to you before, Ryan, in the first hour, that this is a matter of degrees of difference. I'm telling you why, when you're confronted with two choices, which may both be relatively appalling, if there are reasons to prefer one over the other, then you ought to prefer that one over the other. And I've actually given you 10 reasons why Barack Obama would be a preferable choice to Mitt Romney. I mean, I'm telling you, Obama was overwhelmingly the preferable choice to John McCain. On the other hand, Al Gore was overwhelmingly preferable to George Bush and Dick Cheney, but they stole the election, and that's the major problem we've got. We got elections that are amenable to being stolen, which means the American people aren't actually able to exert their political will in relation to their own government. I mean, it's got to do with electronic voting machines. It's got to do with getting money out of politics. It's got to do with having public funding for federal elections. Those are indispensable steps to take, Ryan, if we want to recapture control of our own government.
I hear what you're saying as far as voter fraud running rampant and things like that. And I feel like you're placing a lot of blame on the Republicans when the Democrats are just as guilty. I mean, remember Senator Obama? I mean, the stuff
but it's just false. What you're saying, Ryan, is just false. The Democrats want everyone to vote. The Republicans want to exclude the elderly. They want to even exclude veterans, actually. They want to exclude the Latinos. They want to exclude the blacks. They know these blocks overwhelmingly vote Democratic. I mean, look, this is not rocket science, Ryan. There's a reason why the Republicans in all these states are pushing for these ID laws. They're trying to intimidate voters that they know would vote overwhelmingly Democratic.
Jim, are you familiar with the Democratic, I believe it's Democrat-backed bill in Ohio that would prohibit veterans from voting overseas? I'm sure you've heard about that one, right?
Well, you know, if you want to tell me in some states you got corrupt Democrats who are supporting some bill that's ridiculous on its face. Do you know most veterans returning now are regarded by Homeland Security as potential terrorists, Ryan? I mean, you know, the situation is absurd, and that's undoubtedly because they're disillusioned with our foreign policy and they know how to use weapons.
Got that right. Well, Jim, we got to take a quick break here. Thank you so much for staying with us, folks. When we come back, we're going to open up the phone lines and take your questions. This is The Sound of Freedom, Orion Talk Radio, with our guest, Jim Fetzer. We'll be right back. You guys are listening live to The Sound of Freedom on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Ryan Brooks. Folks, 1 hour after The Sound of Freedom tonight, make sure you check out the Freedom Link with Joe Joseph, exposing tyranny, confronting conspiracies. He usually has a great guest on there to break down important issues, so make sure you check out Freedom Link tonight from 10 to 12 Eastern Time, only here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Now, I have our guest, Mr. James Fetzer, on the line, and I also have a couple of callers on the line, so we're going to get right into it. I have Mike from looks like Deltona Mike. Daytona. Mike from Florida. What's your question, Mike?
Hey, good evening, folks. Thank you for taking my call. Greetings to you, former Marine Mr. Fetzer.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, sir, are you involved at all with the Oath Keepers program, or any folks who speak about our rights and our Constitution and our abilities to do things, or do you just continually to fearmonger into the political spectrum?
Well, you might want to spell out what I've heard about the Oath Keepers is a group, it may even be within the military, that have a dedication to the Constitution. I feel that same sense. I mean, I just took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I just didn't expect there'd be so many domestic. So, I would like to believe that I'm doing everything I can to keep this country free. I've devoted so much of my life to exposing corruption in government, including complicity by the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, anti-Castro Cubans, the Mafia, and the assassination of JFK, including collusion between the Pentagon, the neocons, the CIA, the White House in relation to 9/11, including a much smaller group that appears to have involved Karl Rove, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld in the plane crash that took the life of Senator Paul Wellstone, who was opposing them on Iraq, and whom Cheney had personally threatened, telling him that if he spoke up against them in Iraq, that he'd suffer severe consequences.
Jim, I hear you. I just want to stick to the caller's question. Go ahead, Daytona Mike. Just try to finish it up, and we'll get Mike from South Texas on here. Go ahead, Daytona Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Fetzer, I do appreciate your work, and I have looked into Senator Wellstone, and I did see that plane, the metal included, burned to dust, which perhaps we have also seen before. Lots of interesting work before us. But, sir, I feel that you divulge people too far into the political spectrum, the left and the right dominance. Take your pick the candidate. None of them have helped us out in the last years. They haven't closed the border, sir. They haven't revalued our currency. I think I appreciated some of your earlier talks about, yes, sir, they are coming to round us up. They are going to pick their enemies. They have made a list. They are using data mining capabilities. Please, sir, follow up there.
Well, I agree with all of that, but we got an election coming up. I'm talking with Ryan about the reasons I see in relation to the narrowly circumscribed question of whether one of these candidates is better than the other, given all the horrifying background that we all agree is present. Is there a good reason to prefer one to the other? And I've given 10 reasons, each of which I believe is a good one for preferring Obama, even though I am very concerned about all the other issues that you're talking about.
Thank you, Jim. I sure appreciate that. And I certainly have my absentee ballot here that I received in the mail, courtesy of my county government. And I think realistically, sir, that it would be better to throw it in the burn barrel rather than fill it out and bow down complicitly to any of these stupid morons who anybody thinks is going to run our economy. You can pick the puppet, but the Federal Reserve bankers still have the strings above them, sir.
What are the 10 reasons I've given? Can you name any of them?
Mr. Fetzer, indeed, I have listened to not only this broadcast, sir, but your previous on Maggie, your previous on Michael Harris. Yes, sir, I do not agree with you, sir. You can pick your political candidate. I mean, dare I even begin to say, should we vote for a third party? Because obviously that is not a conscious accomplishment of anything at all.
Well, I've already said that,
I cannot defend your stance for Joe Biden or Mr. Obama at all, and you could label me whatever you want to, but...
All right, hey, guys, check it out.
It's fine. We're all entitled to have our own opinions. That's one of the few benefits that still remain to us as citizens of the United States, to have our own opinions.
Hey, check it out, guys. All right, I got 3 other callers on the line. If you guys could just kind of keep it quiet until I get to you. I appreciate you guys calling in. Daytona Mike, thank you so much. We got to keep it moving, though, to Mike from South Texas. Then we're going to go to area code 705, and then I believe we have Bob from Montana. So you guys sit tight. Mike from South Texas, go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Ryan. Good evening, Mr. Fetzer. This is Michael in South Texas. I've got a couple questions for you regarding your stance on the whole 9/11 issue, and what would appear to be like seeming reluctance on your part to talk about the NYPD's arrest of the dancing Israelis, and then also, if you'd like to maybe snowball into that, Patrick Clausen from the Washington Institute calling for the traditional means to bring the United States into war, which is by false flag. And Mr. Clausen continuing on to go and tell that every war that we've been in has been a false flag. Now, he did not state that 9/11 was the false flag that brought us into, Iraq and Afghanistan. But if you look at the NYPD report of the 5 dancing Israelis, the 73 days they spent in custody, and then Michael Chertoff taking them and letting them go, to me, it seems really, really suspicious that every other aspect gets discussed, and this aspect never gets discussed. If this aspect has any sort of meaning, we went to war with the wrong people. We bombed the wrong country. We killed millions of the wrong people.
Mike, I talk about it all the time. You can't have heard me speak about 9/11 very often, because I talk about the dancing Israelis all the time. They were arrested and held for 71 days before Michael Chertoff released them. 3 of them went back to Israel, went on Israeli TV, and explained how they'd been there in order to...
All 5 of them were on Israeli TV.
No, 3 of them. Mike, it's right on YouTube. There are 3 of them who went on Israel. But what difference does that make? The point is, my first political speech in 2008 during the Ron Paul Freedom Rally, on 15 April 2008 on the grass in front of the Capitol, I was already talking about the dancing Israelis. I was talking about the neocons having joint U.S.-Israeli citizenship. I was saying that they should all resign from office, that we should never appoint anyone with joint citizenship, because who knows what their loyalty to the other state outweighs their loyalty to the United States. I published about it again on is 9/11 research anti-Semitic? Because we have to face up to the fact that Israel played an important role in 9/11. It was a neocon with a Mossad job, and I've addressed this in many places. So, you're just off base if you think I don't talk about it. I talk about it all the time.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you talking about it. I think to me, and to many people who look at this is the most pressing issue, because it means if this has any merit, we bombed 2 countries incorrectly for 10 years. And in the process of bombing those 2 countries for 10 years, we also gave $8 million a day for the last 10 years to the country that bombed us. So if that's how you feel, keep it up and push that to the front, because
listen. I talk about it a lot. I even organized a symposium in London at Friend's house in 2010, debunking the war on terror and explaining with Kevin Barrett and Gilad Otzman, where Ken O'Keefe was our master of ceremonies. He was the hero of the Freedom Flotilla, and he disarmed 2 of the Israeli commandos. How there should be a linkage between the anti-war movement and the 9/11 movement, because the whole 9/11 thing was a charade, a phony event, which once exposed removes any semblance of reason for the war on terror, which was complete fabrication to promote a political agenda. A presentation I gave in Portland may be highly relevant here. You can find it on YouTube. It's entitled False Flag Terror and the Rise of the Global Police State.
Thank you, sir. I will look for that. Please continue to expose this, and remember, all dual citizens out of USA government service.
Absolutely.
Now.
I agree with you completely, and I'm glad you called.
James, I got to cut you off there. Mike from South Texas and Daytona. Mike, thank you so much for calling in, folks. We have to take a quick break. Area code 705, stay with us. Bob from Montana, stay with us. We are going to be right back, folks. The Sound of Freedom with James Fetzer, Orion Talk Radio. Don't go away. Into the future.
Mr. Fetzer, I appreciate all your work up there in Vancouver, and I did see the stuff about Mr. Boggiaggio trying to bring
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back live on the Sound of Freedom, Orion Talk Radio. I've got the phone lines full. We are live. This is, once again, Sound of Freedom, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I go any further, I just want to let you guys know that you can take Orion Talk Radio with you wherever you go. If you have a smartphone, do a quick search in the app section of your phone. You can download TuneIn. It's a free app, and you can take Orion Talk Radio wherever you go, in the car, in the gym, wherever you please. It's just another way to listen to news and views beyond the mainstream media. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm your host, Ryan Brooks. We have Mr. Jim Fetzer on the line with us, and we have a couple more callers with a couple more questions. First, I'm going to go to Angela in Ontario. Angela, what question do you have tonight?
Well, I was listening to one of your shows there on the internet when you were talking with Doug Shapiro.
I got all of that until the end. What was that? Say that again.
I was looking at a feature you have on the internet there, talk you had with Douglas Shapiro.
For Mr. Fetzer?
Douglas Shapiro. You had him on Live Talk, I think, a few weeks ago. And,
are you talking to Mr. Fetzer, or are you talking to me? Because I don't remember having anybody named Doug on my show.
Well,
I don't think I featured him either. So.
Well, he's from the Free Press up on Owen Sound. And I was just reading from a Ryan Talk Radio, and you had him on there. And
well, he might have been. I mean,
okay. What did he have to say, Angela?
Well, basically, he was going on about how he was off the grid, and was going on about Hitler and Jesus, and he made himself sound like he was something special because he was living on this farm, and had nothing to do with the government. Well, I'm his ex, and I have an 11-year-old daughter with him, and he owes me $44,000 in child support, and he's all about UN and all the rest of it. He got booted out of the army. So this message is for Doug Shapiro.
Angela, we sympathize with you. I hope you're successful. I assume you have an attorney, and you're tracking him down and going to make him fulfill his responsibilities to you and your child.
Yeah, because he's on this Free Press of Owen Sound, and then he came out of there, and he's on everything, going on about Hitler and Jesus and how he's reformed, and he's living off of the land and he's off the grid because he's this good person. He's hiding because he doesn't want to pay for his child. That's the real reason. Nothing to do about being this glorious stand-up guy who's all born again and totally against the government and all the rest of it. He's only off the grid because
Thank you for working that into the mix. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Angela. Say his name one more time, loud and clear, so everybody can go look into him for themselves.
Douglas Milton Shapiro from the Free Press, Owen Sound.
All right. Thank you, Angela. Thank you so much for calling into the broadcast tonight. We're going to move it right to Bob in Montana. Bob, I know you've been waiting a long time, brother. Thank you for hanging in there.
That's all right.
What do you have to say tonight?
Okay. This is something that just popped into my mind. The Council of Governors was, through an executive order in 2010, 10 governors, one for each FEMA region. How does your guest feel about that?
I feel terrible about FEMA. I was mentioning an article I published recently entitled From America to America, the End Game. That's America spelled with a C in the first instance, to America spelled with a K in the second. These FEMA camps are over 300, these 30,000 drones, the requisition of this fantastic stock of ammunition, 40 caliber hollow point. It's not even permissible for use in warfare under the Geneva Conventions. And I'll tell you, as I've explained in a couple of my most recent articles, I mean, this ammo is for use against us. Homeland Security has no role in foreign affairs. Therefore, it's only for domestic consumption. It's rather unnerving. And when you put together another of my recent articles explain that there is no domestic terrorist threat, according to the government's own study, a Senate subcommittee, it's really extremely disturbing, Bob, that they should be planning for some kind of all-out assault against the American people.
Okay, that's awesome because you said exactly. I was going to get into that about the ammo, but you've already said it for me. So
yeah. If you go to
that.
Gentlemen, if I could just interject real quick here. I think that Bob's question does a very good job of painting the picture that, hey, Mr. Fetzer and I really kind of got into it during the first hour about our political beliefs, but that's how they divide us and conquer us, folks, all right? Regardless of who you're going to vote for or whatever, we are under attack. And at least Mr. Fetzer is on we are in the same understanding as far as 9/11, huge questions, the anthrax attacks on Capitol Hill, the fact that we're facing all of these problems from the federal government, FEMA. We can agree on these things. So I just wanted to point that out. And, we don't agree on things, definitely. But at the same time, I'm not outraged and hanging up on him because, he believes politically different than I do. And I just wanted to say, Bob, I thought that was a great question. And as we see, Mr. Fetzer does have some of the same beliefs that we do as well. So, why can't we all just get along, right, guys? Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
Can I finish up? I need to follow up on this.
Go ahead, Bob.
Now,
Bob said yes.
Because they bought them rounds for a reason. So the way I see it is rather than keep voting for the lesser of two evils and actually have them using them rounds against us, maybe it's time, instead of voting for the lesser of two evils, maybe we need to go to the polls and carry signs, we will no longer vote for the lesser of two evils. Maybe we need to have 4 candidates because they shafted Ron Paul at the RNC down in Florida.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Ron Paul got the shaft all the way from Iowa, New Hampshire, around the clock. I couldn't believe the way in which they were depriving him of his delegates and his representation. I was convinced from the debates that Ron Paul was the only sane Republican candidate. Even Mitt Romney was trying to outdo Rick Perry, was trying to outdo Rick Santorum, was trying to outdo Michelle Bachmann about who would be the first to strike Iran, where the estimates have it there'd be 1 million dead Iranians outright and then another 35 million more premature deaths as the wave of contamination swept across Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Ron Paul was the only sane candidate there. He wanted to close our bases, bring our troops home, end these wars, cut off foreign aid, and audit or abolish the Fed. I stand with him 100%. If Ron Paul were on the ticket with Jesse Ventura, I'd be campaigning for him right now.
Exactly. So how did we let this happen, and why are we still going to vote for the lesser of two evils? How are we going to stop this cycle?
Well, you got to get rid of electronic voting machines in the first place because they're being used to steal elections. The Republicans can't win any honest election, therefore they have to steal them. They've got lots of money. They own these companies that run the electronic voting machines. It's simply absurd when you have these companies that are known to be supportive of or owned by Republican supporters to run these counts. They're easy to gimmick. I spent a year studying computer science. I've written books about it. This is completely ridiculous. It's child's play. It can be as simple as knowing which candidate's going to get the most votes, and if it's not your guy, you just switch the total so that your guy gets the votes the other guy would have got otherwise. Then you got to get all this private money out of public election. We should have public financing for all federal elections. That's essential. And then you got to get all the lobbyists out of Washington. There are probably 100 or more lobbyists for every member of Congress. We got to get rid of them, get them out. Then we got to restore the draft, because until we do that, American people don't pay enough attention to these decisions of war and peace because they're letting someone else do it. They're not worried about their own sons and daughters. We got to bring back the draft to help restore democracy.
I disagree with the draft.
Bob, go ahead. I'll let you throw one more thing in there, Bob, and then we got to keep it moving. But go ahead and say your last piece there.
All right. The way I see it is we need a president that will sign executive orders saying the president can't accept corporate donations to run for president.
Yeah, you got to change federal. You got to change federal campaign finance law. I agree with that. The Supreme Court made a terrible decision, but we're stuck with it right now. Citizens United. We need legislation that overcomes that terrible decision. And I say, no matter how terrible we regard Romney and Obama, Romney is worse than Obama. That's my argument. They're both bad. They're both seriously flawed, but Obama is clearly better than Romney, even though they're both unacceptable.
I'll agree with that. They are equally evil. And I guess that's all I have to say. They're equally evil.
Montana. Bob, thank you so much for calling in. We just got to keep it moving here, folks, because we have a break coming up. But
all right, man. Thanks for the show.
No problem, Bob. Thank you for listening. And, folks, we have one last segment. This has been some incredible radio. We have James Fetzer on the phone with us. This is the Sound of Freedom, Orion Talk Radio. We got a 3-minute break. Don't go away. We're going to be right back and shut this thing down.
It's great, Ryan.
When people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. Thomas Jefferson. You are listening to the Sound of Freedom on the Orion Talk Radio Network.
You got that right, folks. We're on our last segment of the evening with Mr. James Fetzer. One more time, just remember, the Freedom Link is 1 hour after tonight's broadcast. So when this show's over, you have 1 hour to do what you got to do. But make sure you come right back to Orion Talk Radio to hear my main man, Joe Joseph, and the Freedom Link. I believe the man behind the scenes, Mr. Timmy Watts, will be on there as well. Always makes some great radio. So, folks, check that out. In the meantime, we're just going to kind of close things up with Mr. James Fetzer. I'm really happy that he came on the show today. I mean, we have some views that don't necessarily match up, but at the end of the day, we can still shake hands and make friends, and nobody's huffing and puffing and getting all mad. In closing, Mr. Fetzer, what would you like to tell everybody?
Well, Ryan, I think you're a great host, and I think programs like this where we can have free and open discussion of political issues, however controversial they may be, is extraordinarily important to the American people, and helps to preserve our critical judgment by hearing both sides of multiple issues. In this case, of course, I've offered 10 reasons why, even though I regard both of these candidates as seriously flawed, Obama is clearly a preferable candidate to Romney, even if, in the broader scheme of things, we might regard both of them as being far below what we would prefer to have in our presidential choices.
Right. And I hear you there. I mean, we still have, the right to have our own beliefs, and we're not being persecuted for it or taken away for it yet. Mm-hmm. And, in my opinion, I just don't, I won't be able to settle for it. But I could see your argument. I mean, Willard Romney absolutely disturbs me to no ends. I really had to work when I was trying to get Ron Paul on the ballot, and really working in Washington State to get Ron Paul elected during the primaries, and just Mitt Romney was our number one enemy. I mean, he is a slimy, deceptive liar. I mean, just very, very scary. And, truth is stranger than fiction, folks. But I also want to remind everyone one more time, Mr. Fetzer, where can people find your website if they want to hear what you have to say about September 11th, JFK, things of that nature?
Well, the best place to go, Ryan, is going to be Veterans Today, Jim Fetzer. Two of the articles I was referring to, you can find there. One's entitled Fusion and Fear in America, the Non-Existent Terrorist Threat, which reports that although we have all these FEMA camps and this massive stock of ammunition and the drones, that in fact a Senate subcommittee has discovered that by tracing reports submitted by fusion centers, which are integrations of law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, there is no evidence of any domestic terrorist threat, which compounds the consideration I discussed then in the second article, Homeland Security Preparing for Massive Civil War, because it seems that this in excess of 1.5 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point ammunition that Homeland Security has acquired, ammunition that isn't even permissible in warfare under the Geneva Conventions, that it's for domestic consumption. That's more than 3 bullets for every man, woman, and child in the United States of America, Ryan. So right. I do think that we are up for some serious times ahead, which I do not underestimate at all.
Right. And once again, I think it paints a very good picture on what you said there, Mr. Fetzer, as far as, we may, agree to disagree on political issues. But the main thing is here, folks, we are facing imminent danger. We are facing a harder time than an easier time. Things will get worse until they get better, or before they get better, rather. But with people like Mr. Fetzer out there, with people like Popeye and other hosts on this network who are trying to get people just to start thinking for themselves, you might come to a different conclusion than I do, and you might come to a different conclusion than Mr. Fetzer does. But together we will awaken and realize we have a problem. We're going to put our foot down and we're not going to take it anymore. Mr. Fetzer, do you think that that's an accurate description of what we're trying to do here? Just trying to get people to wake up and realize we have a problem.
Yes, and I've become an absolute devotee of the Second Amendment. I think we need to stock up on weapons and ammunition, put in a food supply. You ought to be able to survive for at least a month minimally in your own home on your own food supply, because I'm sorry to say it looks as though the American government is preparing to go to war with the American people.
You got that right. And folks, you heard it from Mr. Fetzer. You know, you hear me talk about it a lot. If you don't have food stored up, you still can do it. So, well, Jim, we're going to have to go here. I'm just going to kind of shut down the show here and just read a couple of things off to the listeners. But thank you so much for coming on the air. Veterans Today is where they can find you. Is that right? VeteransToday.com?
Veterans Today, Jim Fetzer will give you access to 50 or more articles on 9/11, JFK, and a host of other issues that matter.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. VeteransToday.com. Just search for Jim Fetzer. You'll get all kinds of in-depth research there. And remember, as the saying goes, listen to all, follow none, walk your own path the best that you can. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of his information very interesting. Mr. Fetzer, thank you again for coming on, and we'll keep in touch.
Ryan, my great pleasure. You're a great host. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
All right, folks, there he goes, Mr. James Fetzer. And, you know, we had a heated debate there for the first hour or so, but I had to just kind of sit back, take a deep breath, and realize that, you know what, we may not see eye to eye on everything. It's almost kind of like dealing with your family. You're dealing with people that are trying to do good. They're out there promoting the truth, which is the enemy of the lie, which is what we're being told pretty much from every angle by our mainstream media and the government. But he's out there trying to get the truth out. And I like where he goes into JFK and 9/11 and things like that. And he's come on this network numerous times to break those things down. So we wanted to spice it up a little bit, but we almost let it get us divided. And that's one thing that we just got to try to keep a lookout for. So once again, Mr. Fetzer was very interesting to say the least. And I did like hearing his opinion. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. I just want to cover a couple of things before we shut the show down for good. You know, Albert Camus actually asked one time back here in the 50s, what is a rebel? A rebel is somebody who says no. A rebel is somebody who puts their foot down and says, enough is enough, I'm not going to take it anymore. If you're listening to this broadcast, I would hope that you rebel, that you are a rebel in some sort of the word, whether that means not allowing yourself to be groped at the airports, whether that means opting out of the dollar to the best of your ability, whether that means stocking up on food, ammunition, learning how to use a weapon, getting in shape, stop eating GMOs, stop drinking fluoride water. Those are all ways that you can peacefully rebel against this slave state system that is trying to kill all of us. I just want to cover a couple of headlines, folks, because we didn't get to them at the beginning of the broadcast. But yesterday we covered the social collapse of this country and how the fabric of our social existence is really starting to evaporate. In case you missed it, violent crimes have jumped up 18% in 2011, the first rise in almost 20 years, and it went up nearly 20%. So it's not just my show covering crazies in the news every day. This is a national issue. We are having more crime, more problems. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to let you know, yes, violent crime jumped up 18% last year, the first rise in nearly 20 years. In the meantime, welfare has soared up 32% in the past 4 years alone. We currently have 46.8 million Americans on food stamps. Welfare now costs America $1.3 trillion, the government's biggest expenditure in 2011. In other news, Florida business booms, selling doomsday shelters, offering flat-screen TVs, full-size kitchens, starting at $59,900. So if you live down in Florida, you might want to check that out. I don't know if you're going to want the flat-screen TV, though. In the meantime, did you guys hear about the Virginia shopping mall evacuated after a man threw a Molotov cocktail into the food court earlier today? Jobless claims rise 46,000 over the past week. That's 388,000 nationally last week alone. Another example of our social collapse here. Bus driver doesn't stop for 8 blocks as men viciously beat woman on the public bus in Baltimore. Then you have Mahmoud Ahmadinejad asking, how long can debt-laden United States remain the world power? That's from the Jerusalem Post. That's a good question. You also have the Department of Homeland Security graduating the first corps of Obama brown shirts, the FEMA Corps. Their very first graduation happened just recently. And meanwhile, the president is bragging about his appeal among toddlers. Just a couple of headlines that they're not really talking about in the news, folks. But I want to thank you very much for tuning in, talking about things like this, going past the lamestream media, ignoring the fraud that they are, and talking about real issues. One last thing, and I just overlooked this here. The video on ABC, this ABC video that's being all hyped up right now, video shows drunk and stoned contractors in Afghanistan. Yeah. Folks, if you've heard my broadcast before, you've heard me talk about my experience with the contractor who was stoned out of his mind back in 2009, who made over $125,000 for sitting in a forward operating base with nothing to do. And I thought to myself, wow, this guy's really, he's making the big bucks, and he's not doing anything at all. I mean, why is it like this? That was my first experience with the military-industrial complex. Well, now there's a video on ABC today showing drunk and stoned contractors in Afghanistan. Make sure you check that stuff out, folks. Just look at it for yourself. See where our taxpayer dollars are going. See what is happening over there. Don't remember the troops. Don't forget the troops. 68,000 of them still in Afghanistan. You hear the music, folks. The show is over for tonight. We had a heck of a broadcast. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. I'm going to have somebody from the Vice President of Veterans Affairs out here in Washington State to break down what we're doing for veterans. This is the Sound of Freedom signing off. Thank you again for listening. Orion Talk Radio, Freedom Link, 1 hour. I'll see you there. Good night, everybody.